And
you know, stand by, have a good show.
Hello again and welcome. Another edition of Media Watch. I'm your host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Good to see you again, Eric.
And here we go, one more time into the mix. So, EVT Educational Productions and Manhattan Neighborhood Network come together to help bring this program to you folk. And we're pre-taping the Thursday before the show airs on the Monday. By next Monday, who knows what's going to be in the forefront of the news, but if we kick off the show with politics, we can tell you that, two more individuals last week jumped into the Republican side of the 2016 political fray. Most of you remember Rick Santorum from the previous go-round of Republican candidates. But Bob, tell us a little bit, if you can remember, about George Pataki. George Pataki has thrown his hat into the ring.
Right, and I was listening to that this morning. He, like the other Republicans, went right after Hillary with a few pointed comments about how she left the White House with sort of a conservative bank account and is now quite wealthy at the moment. Just a lot of innuendo in that vein. But of course, Pataki was a 2 or 3 term governor.
I believe he actually got 3 terms in the state of New York.
I think you're right, following Mario Cuomo, who also had 3 terms. But apparently the voters tired of him and replaced him with Pataki at that point. But Pataki, and I've met him a couple of times when he was governor. He came through Brooklyn a couple times. But at least in my opinion, and we try to say when we're giving our opinion, his tenure was remarkably empty. I don't remember much from that from his administration that you can actually point to him and say that's a Pataki addition to the state or something, some kind of legacy that I can remember. But that's just me. But now, after being out of the State House in so many years and being off of the national spectrum for so long, all of a sudden he's back as a presidential candidate. So at least in my opinion, it's surprising. Well,
George Pataki, I guess, hopes to be back. There was some kind of economic initiative, the various empowerment zones that were put into play that came into being under his administration. I don't think the initiative actually got started by George Pataki, but it finally came to fruition in the course of his tenure in office.
Were those sort of those tax incremental districts where you can sort of capture the taxes raised in a district for improvements within that district? That type of empowerment
No, I
zone?
think it was a state and federal government partnership where they came together and called it an economic empowerment, economic development zones, which they put out in various sections. There was one, the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone, and then there was another one somewhere else throughout the states.
I'm starting to remember, you're right.
That's the only thing I can recall that George Pataki did anything for anyone that may be of something of lasting value.
But credit where credit is due.
And as I said, prefacing that with, I don't believe he started the initiative, it just came to fruition under his watch. But the interesting thing is the way politics is going to unfold in this country. This early in the game with that many Republican candidates, it's almost I don't want to say laughable, but it's something that I don't really even want to start to pay attention to. And our job is to pay attention to media things, but there's just too many candidates. It's just too early, and they're already saying all kinds of stupid things. So now that was editorial comment. They're already saying stupid things as an editorial comment, but I'm sure the general public is aware of some of the crazy things that are being said by some of these Republicans. But you're right, because Hillary Clinton is the presumptive favorite on the Democratic side of the spectrum, they all come out and they target Hillary. But it's interesting that Bernie Sanders also last week, the independent from the state of Vermont, actually announced his presidential candidacy officially. He'd been talking about it, but he did it officially. as a candidate running on the Democratic side of the ledger, not as an independent. He wants to be the Democratic nominee, and he has actually come out and said that. And I believe he's serious. A lot of people say that Bernie Sanders is doing this because he wants to push Hillary Clinton a little more from the center right to the center left, and he wants to get certain things on the agenda talked about. In listening to his announcements and listening to him make some appearances on a number of shows, I actually think Bernie Sanders is in this to try to win that nomination. What's your take?
Is that what you feel from what he's been saying? Because it seems to me that he joined the fray basically to push the conversation, to make sure the conversation gets said, rather than just a candidate like Mrs. Clinton just laying back and comfortably moving ahead to the nomination. He wants to make sure that there's people are engaging and people are talking, and as much of an irritation as it might be to the Democratic National Committee, to him I think it's just too bad. He wants to make sure that people know he's there and that he does have something to say.
Yeah, I believe most pundits and the conventional wisdom is that he's doing it to get issues raised, but in listening to him talk, I may be wrong. It's just my gut feeling. But I actually, you remember Dennis Kucinich?
Yes, I do. I met him briefly in D.C. Yeah.
Dennis Kucinich wasn't really in that to do a conversation. He was in it because he actually thought that it was worth running. Long shot though it was, if he got the nomination, it would have been better for the country. Mm-hmm. I have a sense that Bernie Sanders is probably more in that vein than Dennis Kucinich was now.
Okay.
I might be early on, I might be wrong, but as they used to say in certain places, stay tuned. Watch this as it unfolds and develops, because I do believe he's going to pick up some traction because of what he's saying and how passionately he's saying it. And I do believe that as time goes on, a lot of people are going to notice what he's saying and start to listen carefully.
Okay, and now do you think that, I got sort of the feeling that he was setting himself up for a later run, at least getting his name out there this go-round and making sure he's in the conversation in 2020?
Well, possibly, but like, you know, I'm a senior citizen in my 70s, and Bernie's 73.
Okay.
So 4 years from now, he's going to be 77.
I didn't realize that was the age. Okay.
He's 73.
Okay.
But he's in good shape.
He engages like yourself. He engages younger than that.
Age is in the mind anyway.
Yes.
And my gut feeling is 4 years from now, he may still feel strong enough, young enough, but that doesn't mean the electorate will feel the same way. And so that's why I don't think he's setting himself up for 4 years.
Okay.
I think he says, I'm doing it now because I'm strong, I'm young, quote.
I have something to say.
And I think I could do the job.
Okay.
So that's my prediction on Bernie. And I also predict that he's going to get more traction than people actually are initially they're actually looking at it as just something that's just a side show. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to go out on a limb and predict Bernie's going to be in it for the long haul, and he's going to be on a debate stage with Hillary Clinton a lot longer than people expect.
Okay, and not to lengthen the discussion, but I hope that the national media actually cover him, because when you deal with packed journalism, you deal with people doing what everyone else is doing, and if nobody else is giving him a platform to speak on, with the national media, I often see that people are dismissed. Hopefully he won't get dismissed.
You're right, because that's exactly what they did to Dennis Kucinich.
Okay.
They did not cover him, and when they did, they covered him in a very deprecating manner. They did not give credence to what he had to say, even though what he had to say was right on target and was germane to all the issues, and he spoke to all the issues. What I like about Bernie is he's consistent. He is vocally strong, which means he's not one of these people you can silence and he goes away. And he seems to be able to maximize whatever platform he gets because the coverage has been significant. I'm finding him popping. In fact, there was a very interesting piece in the Times, New York Times. When you see this, it'll be a last week piece that talked about the fact that within his gatherings in the initial state Vermont gatherings, a lot of the seniors that came out to hear him are normally the seniors that might not be enamored of his message because they tend to be more conservative, more
Right.
whatever, and his message seems to resonate more with younger people. But the audiences have been definitely well sprinkled with people his age and older and relatively younger and a lot of young people, college-age students. And they were listening, and they were actually, in the sense like we're doing here, nodding their heads.
Okay.
And so I think it's going to be a very interesting tour to watch. And I say tour because I think he's in it for the long arc. So I'm using tour in the sense of a political campaign that will probably have trouble raising money, but will actually begin to get grassroots donations and will continue.
Okay. Well, I for one will keep a close eye on the social media because that's where the traction can be had for a low price.
Yes, exactly right. And I do believe his Facebook page has a great mixture of young and old quotes, young quotes, FDR quotes, and younger quotes. So it's going to be an interesting thing. Now, I didn't really mean to spend that much time on politics, but that's a story worth discussing because we need to give those kinds of stories the traction they deserve. So let's backtrack and deal with some of the other issues that we normally deal with. There was a Matt Taibbi piece that we talking about.
Right.
Well, it dealt with another incident of the power of the ever-present cell phone video or mobile video of some sort.
It was a piece on the power of citizen journalism.
Yeah,
and the ubiquitous.
Can you call it up?
I'll call it up while you summarize.
Yeah, basically, another quote perpetrator was going to be accused of a crime that he probably would have been charged, booked, etc., and possibly go to trial on, and on the strength of the fact that the prosecutors usually take police testimony over the rest of us probably would have been convicted. But in the instance of this that Taibbi was quoting, let's call it up and see what the reference is.
This is in Rolling Stone by Matt Taibbi. Yeah. And he talks about the shooting by Officer Michael Slager of Walter Scott, who was running away from him at that time. North Charleston is the location, correct? Right. And he's talking about the power of the big question, of course, is would he have gotten away with this if not for that video? And you and I had discussed the initial police reports. Talking about the suspect engaging with the officer or reaching for a stun gun.
The taser, right.
Right, and that was all in the initial reporting internally by the police to each other before anyone knew that this video was available. And I guess had you, let's see, I know I had picked another. I know a graph had been quoted, so let me see if I can pick it out real quickly here.
He referenced
here we go.
Yeah.
The only difference is in the past, before everyone above the age of 2 had a cell phone, the insultingly lame explanations of the police, quote, "the gun just went off, the suspect suddenly took a swing at me," unquote, were almost always swallowed whole by juries and the media alike. But even before cell phones became ubiquitous, the presumption that a police officer's testimony is sacrosanct started to die out. Public defenders, and I know a couple of good ones, in big cities long ago learned to deal with the frustration of police caught lying on the stand who were allowed to continue giving evidence in other cases. I can't quote my friend's name, but we've had this discussion.
You mean a public defender friend?
My public defender friend, yes.
Yeah. What I like about Taibbi is that after the first flush of a story, everybody moves on to the next story. And he does these background in-depth thought pieces that Rolling Stone is always willing to print.
I notice he's quoting a number of cases by...
That's what I like about it.
By reference and case, which you can go look up on your own to see if he's...
The bottom line is he doesn't just use one case. He gives you a litany of here's another example, here's another example, here, which is some of what we do here on Media Watch, because when we were dealing with the police video and the first initial blush of the Charleston Times when they first did their report.
Right.
And we talked about the fact that they realized what had gone wrong and came back and corrected their own report and made it known to their readers that they felt that they had not practiced good journalism in the first blush of that story.
Right.
And so
they took it upon themselves to correct it, and like you said, they didn't duck away from their original reporting. They said, well, you know what, folks, we could have done a lot better, and we did not. And that won't be happening again, according to their...
And it's when media organizations are big enough and honest enough to admit their failings and try to correct the record that this democracy tends to work better, because we then have the trust of our reading public and our viewing public, so that back in the old days, I tell you, I mean, there was a high degree of trust in the Fourth Estate, in the journalism business, right after Watergate, right after the entire Watergate hearings, right after the Pentagon Papers, which is another leak story that the country was just blown away when they discovered what the federal government had been doing. And to the point where here it is in 2015, I'm going to have to revisit my original take on Edward Snowden, just because the stuff that's been revealed about egregious this government had been breaking the law and dealing with us means that, yeah, sometimes you actually have to run the risk of what seems to be treason and an unpatriotic act to do what's actually in the best interest of the country. And you know what? This past weekend, when this show airs, the Patriot Act and most provisions might lapse because the Congress, the Senate, will not extend it.
Right.
That will be a good thing if indeed that happens. There may be a last-minute flurry, and they may pass this new bill. What is it called? The Freedom Act, the U.S. Freedom Act. There's another patriotic name to another law that may be infringing on our actual rights and freedoms.
And you and I have issues with this all the time. You hang a glorious sounding name.
Anytime you see a name like the United States Freedom Act, run from it. It means they're trying to do a number on you, folk. Just like the Patriot Act totally decimated our constitutional rights. We've said this more than once on this show. Well, yeah, what's going to happen? Well, in a week's time, we'll know how much expired, whether we've regained some of our rights and our freedoms, or whether there was a last-minute Hail Mary or whatever they call these things, when they throw that last-minute savior for doing something that we still think is nefarious and not in the best interest of the democracy.
And we've definitely gone over that in the past and picked out portions of the Patriot Act that were obviously nothing close to patriotic. And who held the floor recently, arguing for a few hours?
To let it lapse, or to
let it lapse?
I slept on that. Somebody actually stood in the Senate
basically trying to argue that the law was bad government, et cetera, et cetera. But in any case, let's hope that we have that lapse, so that at least some thought can be given to whatever will replace it, and hopefully not much. Actually,
you know, it's interesting, because the rise of Daesh and ISIS and ISIL and whatever you're calling that reconstituted Iraqi army, Ba'athist army, whatever they are, that's just come back again, because those people are so visible and so virulently bad, they're using that as the straw man to say we can't let this stuff lapse, and so therefore we have to extend this law. But you know what? We can let that law expire, because in the face of real threats, then you can actually say there are real threats, let's craft a law, a new law that actually deals with the new threats and still protect the safety of the country. I'd just as soon see a bad law lapse and go back to the well and draw a good law, and still protect the country than say, okay, we're going to extend a bad law just because we want to safeguard the country. Well, you're actually robbing us of our freedoms. You're not safeguarding the country.
No.
You're actually destroying the principle on which the country was founded.
And we can take some of the blame for that. We, not that I represent the whole media, but I mean the Fourth Estate. A lot of newspapers and networks were afraid to challenge the Patriot Act as it was being.
No, I think Media Watch was saying bad law, bad law, bad law.
Media Watch, but I'm not.
Oh, you're not putting us with those other folks.
I'm talking NBC, ABC.
Okay,
I'm talking the New York Times. We didn't have major editorials.
No, you're right. They were all caught up in the post 9/11 mentality, just like they were all playing drum major and whatever for the run-up to the Iraq War. When Media Watch was saying, you know what, we got people in the intelligence community that's saying, no, there are no weapons of mass destruction. That's a crock of bull. You folks need to step back and look at this. We were saying that, and we were bringing people on that were saying that way back when. And I like the fact that we were able to say that and do that back then, and we can do that now.
That's what this platform allows. I mean, not to make a commercial here, but this public access type of access to the, to the public is what this is meant for.
You're right, and you know what? That's a great segue, because what do we have, about 7 minutes or something?
7 minutes
okay,
left,
so we could segue to the fact that because this is part of cable, this is a cable access show, and cable is currently being disrupted by the internet and broadband, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
And so there's a whole new game and there's a whole new playing field. And because there's a new game and a new playing field, the New York Times reported last week, when you air this show, that the Federal Communications Commission is set to propose a $1.7 billion plan to offer subsidized broadband internet access to low-income families. That's a very interesting development because, as you well know, Bob, way back 30 years ago, the FCC came up with something that they call Lifeline.
Right.
Give our viewers a little bit on what Lifeline was.
I mean, I'm old enough to have worked for the old New York telephone before it turned into Verizon. And Lifeline was a service for low-income residents to make sure they would never be out of contact. They would give them the lowest possible level, but reasonable level of a telephone service at a very low price.
Yes, and the federal government would help them pay that bill.
Exactly.
And that's what Lifeline, that's why it was called Lifeline.
And even if you didn't pay the bill, there was a procedure to make sure you didn't get cut. There was a little corporate procedure just to make sure, hey, you really need help, we can find you help. We can get you the little extra money you need to keep the line active.
Right. The background, Lifeline was funded through a levy on landline and cell phone customers, but is not without some controversy these days because 3 men were charged last year, this is in this New York Times report, with allegedly perpetrating a $32 million fraud against the Lifeline scheme to help low-income families. Well, the FCC proposals are said to also include measures designed to combat abuses of the system.
That's good.
So what they're going to do is basically give poor families, low-income families, much better access to the broadband internet web services, and according to Tom Wheeler, the chairman, they're going to give recipients a choice of subsidized phone service, internet access, or a mixture of both. And so that would be really nice. So in the last 4 minutes, while we give the FCC kudos for coming up with that, do we want to talk a little bit about the new wrinkle about this whole merger consolidation? Because Time Warner and Comcast didn't merge because the FCC said not in the best interest, but a new suitor surfaced, old suitor, but an organization called Charter. What Charter Time Warner cable deal could mean for consumers if that merger goes through. And want to give our viewers a little bit about what's being proposed, Bob?
Well, I mean, it's better, well, I should say it's better because that's opinion. We'll be left with Comcast on one side, and if this goes through, the new Charter and
Time Warner
on the other side.
Right.
So you will still have two big competitors in the market, and that by itself makes it a better deal consumer-wise than Comcast Time Warner would have been, because that would have been the big elephant in the room that could have just steamrolled everyone else. I mean, personally, I think that Charter has a challenge to be creative if they come up with this merger, just in the way you talked about the low-income services for internet and email and phone, can they, through competition and now the strength of this new network, help drive down the price of the basic connectivity, that way evening the floor for families? Or will it just be another money-making?
That is exactly the key issue that folks are worried about, because I believe the same chairman, Tom Wheeler, says something to the effect that, if I can find the quote, Federal Communications Committee Chairman Tom Wheeler upped the ante Tuesday, that would have been last Tuesday, folk, saying that, quote, an absence of harm is not sufficient. He said, we'll look to see how American consumers would benefit from a Charter Time Warner cable deal. So he's still worried that maybe that consolidation may not turn out to be in the best interest of the consumer. It may not drive prices down, because when these organizations get bigger and get fewer, they tend to have a way of gatekeeping how they provide services to little players and big players. And so there's been a fear. As a matter of fact, there's an AP article that we were referencing, what the Charter Time Warner cable deal could mean for consumers. And it was written by Tali Arbel and Bree Fowler. Filed it last May 26, which would have been the middle of last week. And one of the key things is what's driving these kinds of consolidations. The cable companies are bulking up as costs for TV channels and sports rise, even as the number of cable and satellite TV subscribers slip. Number of such subscribers have declined. And so the problem is, do bigger cable companies mean higher prices? And that's the rub.
That's the issue.
That is the issue.
Now, the FCC has actually surprised me of late with this concern for the consumers and the recent net neutrality ruling to make sure everyone has equal access. I'm actually surprised that we're getting some value out of this commission of late. Here again, another opinion, but I'm happy to see this. I'm not sure if this will be the greatest deal, as we have about a minute left, for consumers, but at least they're aware of the issues. Yeah,
that's basically how those folks closed that AP article. The paragraph was still, no one knows for sure how the industry's transformation will affect prices. What any given deal means in terms of the ultimate price consumers pay, that's a very difficult question to answer. And they're quoting Amanda Wade, a former Federal Trade Commission lawyer who represents clients in antitrust matters. He said the analysis, more than just price. Do consumers have access to more content, higher broadband speeds? All those go into the mix of assessing it. So we'll have to revisit all these merger manias in the future. But again, this has been Media Watch. I'm Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Another good discussion, Eric.
Thanks again, Bob. And thanks to good graces of Manhattan Neighborhood Network and EVT Educational Productions. We will catch you the next time.